So we should be going live now. Let's go ahead and double check on the LinkedIn to make sure that it is going live. And let's see. Let's check the events. I usually get a notification. I did not get one on this time. There we go. Yep. All right. So it is. We are now live. Confirmed.
Awesome.
Like that's like the natural. I feel like that's how I start all of the. Every time we do it, it's like, are we for sure? Are we for sure live? Yes, we are. Oh, great. Well, again, we're super excited to be here with the last edition of the Pay Practitioners panel for 2024. If you haven't joined us, we do this every 2 weeks with a group of compensation consultants where we talk about all things comp. Today being the last day or the last meeting of 2024, we want to talk about what do we expect to happen in 2025 and what are we expecting to see, what changes, what's going to stay the same. But before we dive into that, I thought there would be one fun conversation we could spend a couple of minutes on because this has been something that was on World at Works forum recently, and then we posted it as a poll, and it was probably the most responded to poll that I have seen on LinkedIn of any that I posted. And given that we've got the group here, I think this would be a fun discussion. So here's the poll that I posted, and I think we have over 900 people that have participated now, all comp people.
Wow.
So hypothetically, if we have a director of compensation who's managing a company of 700 employees, is managing the entire compensation function, but they have no direct reports, what are they? Are they a P5, a P6, an M4, or an M5? And that's what the poll was. It was intentionally vague just to start that conversation, to have that discussion. But how do we do that? Is managing a function the same as a management level role as the surveys are concerned? Love to hear what the group says. I've personally been in that role, so I'd love to know if I had pegged myself correctly.
I call that the director analyst role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
Chief cook and bottle washer.
Yeah.
You get all things under the sun. You have 700 bosses and then you have 700 employees. It's an interesting dynamic because at the end of the day, it is a minefield to trek across to make it something that everyone's happy with by the time you get to the end. It's a cool adventure. You just have to be good at it.
So let me kick off sort of with some answers, not my entire thinking on this. So one is surveys have an answer for this, right? So like the description of the career streams and levels will provide some guidance, and they're not all the same. So let's put that out there. Like one of the sources of variance you might get in the poll, I suspect, is that the Radford definition of P versus M is not exactly the same as other tools. And in some cases, they want to make it rather straightforward and binary. Are there direct reports, right? Like it's intended to be crisp and clean. I don't agree with it. Like that, I don't think that works. But like to be clear, like there is some guidance that it should be sort of directive, right? Super simple. There's a wiggle word, I think, in one in particular where it's like, yeah, but if they don't have direct reports, but they foreseeably would, then you would. And that's where I think that's where the debate comes in. That's the source of it. But like, it's not wrong if somebody said a P role because it doesn't have direct reports, because in some cases, that's what you're told to benchmark it as. And you should assume that some of the data that you're benchmarking in or out is going to reflect that rather black and white perspective. So this gives everyone an out. Like there was no right or wrong answer in the poll intentionally. I know that was the point. But there is some guidance that some will stay true to and others will interpret the wiggle words a little bit differently.
And so
that's the actual answer, right?
I agree with all that, Paul, as well. And the other thing is there's a difference between job matching and the architecture. Internally, you might have a hard line as to whether you can be in the M track or the P track. And I advocate for that because I think having a hard line for the M track means that you can have a hard line on what's expected of somebody before they move into that track, such as learning what it takes to be a manager. We've spoken about that before. But I agree. And I've always learned, so I learned from Eddie Tan at Radford, like he would always say, look, if it's managing a function, it just happens that they haven't got any direct reports, it can still be in the MTRAC, it can still be a director. And to me, if you got the whole compensation for a 700-person company, I would probably job match it to the MTRAC, not least because there just won't be any data in the P5 or P6 as well. Like, it's just unusual. Like, a better benchmark data point would be an M5. That's the equivalent in the market of the value of the role. So from a data perspective, I would probably lean to that M5 match.
You know, past life and current life, the premise behind the architecture and job leveling and so on, in my mind, serves as a guide, not a one way or the other. And utilizing those guides to make decisions sometimes doesn't always apply to life in your organization. And so back in the day, and not too recent in the past, is creating technical career ladders that apply across the board in terms of looking at how you pick up maybe program managers that are in the same kind of boat but in different scenarios, and the folks that are functional directors that no one else is doing it in the organization. They are the sole provider of that function, and they're held accountable globally throughout the whole organization of did you or didn't you. There's got to be hybrid stuff that goes into play with that and creation of the leveling process to make that work. Because if your cookie cutter approach, then the leveling can go across the whole board for anybody, but you're still not addressing the culture and the information that's available to you internally to make good decisions for your own organization. And that's where I think walking off the curb and creating your own technical career ladder with the information you have on board that you're utilizing as a sound basis board can be very effective for your organization, making sure you match them right.
Yeah, I think that's true, Bob. I think am I getting some back? Is there some echo? No, you're okay. Okay. So I agree with what you said. I think the other thing we have to think about though, when we're matching those jobs is what if that job grows and then the next 6 months they have 5 direct reports and we've already matched them to an M5. What is that conversation with the scope of their role and the tactical duties that they have been doing now? And we're going to say, yeah, you just got 5 people now, but we're not changing anything about your job. Welcome to leadership. It is a fine line. I think that you have to think about that future growth.
That's a good point.
And just make sure that you level set with the employee or the person in the job with 700 people. First of all, that's not me. I'm out. I would rather have a staff. So of some that's just, I'm too old for that. But so, but I think that it's just not binary, but we have to think about the future too. And how do we have that conversation going forward when the position grows? And when they're looking at posted jobs, looking at other directors, they need to know that, we've really deemed this as an individual contributor type role. We're paying you to do the whole job and all of that. But if you're applying for another job that has 6 or 7 direct reports, the dynamics of that job are different.
Yeah. I have priced, first, when I read your poll question, Justin, I was like, gosh, has he been in my office today? Because I just got off a call with a client where we were debating that very topic. I have priced that type of a role, both with the professional side and management side. And I think you have to determine what's best given who the employer you're working for, and be consistent. Like similarly situated people and jobs need to be treated the same, and document why you chose the match. If on the surface, if somebody's looking at an org chart, it doesn't make sense. Like a lot of the software, right? You can put some notes in, or if you're doing it in an Excel spreadsheet to document your market pricing decisions, just put some notes in about why you chose the match you did, and then be consistent across the employer.
Yeah. I think one of the questions when it comes down to as well is like, does it really matter at the end of the day? Because oftentimes you find that depending on what your goal is, if it's to establish a range that's appropriate, oftentimes a P5 and an M4 have very similar range or rates. Sure. Not all the time, but at the same time, on the flip side of that coin too, I think I was actually personally surprised to see so many people had recommended a P6, just given that when you look at the breakout of how many P6s you have in that entire job family, it's usually less than 5% of an industry. But I know many, many, many folks that have been in similar roles where they are the head of a function and they are the only person doing that function, and they have that director title. And I know we can't price jobs and title alone, but they carry that strategic responsibility for administering the function far more oftentimes, I think, than we see, is represented as a P6 in a survey typically. So I was personally a little surprised, but not the.
Yeah.
There's a lot of purists in the world who are very black and white in how they do that matching. I'm a little more living in the gray zone when it comes to that.
although I
to attract the right person and keep them, right?
Yeah. But I think that's selling to the test, Denise. Like from the standpoint of, if you really think about what a P6 is supposed to be, do we really think that that's the head of comp in a 700-person company? No, that is like my client closest to my heart is that persona. And I would look almost all of them in the eye and say, yeah, you're not a P6, right? Like just from the type of thinking, the problems that you are expected to solve, not that you can hire a consultant to solve, the problems that you are expected to solve. I'm not convinced that that's going to be the right answer. There may be some, absolutely take that ninja and put them in that company because they want to do that work. That's awesome. But I think people jump to P6, not just for this example, but in many examples, way too fast.
Yeah.
I agree with you 100%.
I agree. Like when I answered the poll, I chose an M level because I feel like that's what the job is. And a lot of times when you're in jobs like that, you have external vendors, consultants, contractors, et cetera, that you're also getting work done through. So you might not look like on an org chart, like you've got direct reports. You are managing people to get work done, right? And I think sometimes, that's not documented in a job description or an org chart very well. So
So I have a question. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, it's just a small side. Just stumped from my own article. I apologize, but it was published in WorkSpan. For those of you who are World at Work members, my colleague and I, Jess, wrote an article about the streamless job architecture. And to James's point earlier, what you benchmark to versus sort of what you describe your levels don't have to be the same thing. Exactly. And this is like one of our examples where it's best when they're not, right? Like we've started to fall in love with not exposing to employees the stream. All these unproductive conversations, like what Michelle put in the comments, in this, like, well, what if I have one direct report, but then they have a bunch of direct reports? What if I'm a project or program leader? Does an intern count? I'm going to hire them someday, right? Like all of those what ifs happen. Where it's just kind of artificial. Like leadership doesn't always happen in a direct report, and the them designation doesn't add as much value in like a codification. You still need to talk to the fact that there's leadership opportunities, there's technical expert opportunities, but those worlds blend a lot in sort of a modern work setting. Not to mention the soapbox I'll get on sort of the below professional roles, the F's, the U's, the W's, depending on what system you use. Like those don't communicate well. So communicating this decision differently than how you benchmark it, like we should remember they don't have to be the same thing.
I think you brought up a good point, Paul. And one of the things that comes to mind is, and maybe I'm an outlier, but I kind of use the James Kirk Star Trek rule of changing the rules. And part of that is the fact that at the end of the day, I feel like the compensation function more so than even HR is responsible to how to drive the business. And the key is putting people in the right spots for the right reasons and for the right money to execute the business strategy. And if you've got a comp guy that's the Lone Ranger, you've got to make sure that at the end of the day, that is plugged in correctly so that if that person leaves and you're not going to make any changes. And the other is, and I think, Carrie, to your point, you can create that rule to include whether they have direct reports or not, so that you don't have that bridge up or bridge down that you have to deal with. It can be one or the other depending on growth of the company or whatever else. You can just kind of put that in as one of those deals where you go required or wish for. But I learned a long time ago on the business side that if you, and Denise, you brought this up too, you got to play in the gray area. You can't play black and white. Otherwise, you force things into situations and processes that at the end of the day are not effective for the organization. Game plan is just drive the business to excellence and make money. So, that's my thought process anyway.
All right.
All right. Oh yeah, that was it's as we're on that discussion of the different levels and what qualifies for P5, P6. I think there's the purist and non-purist, but I believe it's the Willis Towers Watson, the WTW, where their M4s require management of managers, and I don't know that I've seen that. I'd be curious to how often that's truly applied, because I think in many cases, in organizations I've worked for, we would be matching to an M4. It was a strategically valuable role that did not have managers underneath it. And from our position, it tended to work, and to do anything different would result in non-competitive pay. So I always thought that was interesting to see. But I'm curious, how often does your organization or the companies you work with, or how often do you recommend breaking away from what the survey guidelines say if they are very specific? It sounds like quite a bit. Cassandra, I see you can nod your head.
Yeah, Justin, I think it does have a lot to do with the size of the organization. And I think we've talked about this before. We all see over-titling a lot.
Yep.
And so we frequently, for example, might see a job that calls for a director, but then you look at the requirements, it's a bachelor's and 5 years of experience. And you look at the org chart and you're like, it is not a director level job. And so, I'm sure like everyone else on this call does, you go back to skills, education, experience requirements, and you ignore the title. And I think sometimes that's just what you have to do based on the size of the organization. And I want to reiterate something Sherry said, and that is, I think we have to be careful to not let them design the job of the future, right? We got to evaluate the job for what the job is today. As that job changes, we need to continue to evaluate it. But I've seen too many people try and design the job of the future instead of the job that exists today.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah.
Talk about that director title making its way down. I've kind of started to make my peace with title inflation. It just feels like it's just at one point a principal was the most senior SC, and now then there was a fellow, and then there was a distinguished. At one point, a senior engineer was a P4 or P5, and now it's always a P3. I feel like it's just naturally happens, through the court, and director is like such a good example. You see it just appearing for people that, one, have no direct reports, and two, have only a handful of years of experiences. So okay, it's going to happen. It's fine as long as we're talking, as long as we're leveling it, equivalently. That's the most important thing. But the titles are very tricky to keep wrangling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The
one title though that's been lost in all of this is the senior manager title. Like, how many clients do you have that actually use it? Goes right from a manager to a director. And I'm thinking maybe there's that sweet spot for that director who doesn't have any direct reports to kind of slide in there. I don't know. It's a personal challenge of mine when I look at a client and work with a client, is to see how many senior managers they have. And the goal is to get some more.
The senior manager and the senior director, I just thought that they're just bigger managers and directors. They're still like first and second level managers to me for the most part. It's just really a stepping stone title, because there's probably not room to make a manager a director or something like that. So it's always been tricky for me to level senior managers and senior directors, and it kind of depends. The definition has always been a bit murky, but yeah, I agree. Like it's not a very popular title, and associate manager is the other one. Associate director rather is the other one that now is kind of taken.
This is why I spend a lot of time with my clients writing custom definitions for these types of levels, right? We might start off with what a survey or two has for their framework, but ultimately we try to write custom leveling guides and definitions so that they're we're honoring what they've got culturally and how they think about these things, and then applying it consistently.
There's another variable in the equation too, and that's direct reports versus matrixed.
Yeah.
And if you throw in the matrix piece of the puzzle, where you've got responsibility for a whole boatload of people to get them to do things that you don't have direct control over them, is an art. And sometimes it's even more difficult to do that than having direct reports and saying, I understand your concerns, but I need you to do it. You really have to do a lot more negotiation with matrixed employees working on projects. And you see that in larger organizations where you may have divisions or subsidiaries where you're making change across the global sector, and your job is to go in there and sell this thing in every daggum division and every daggum subsidiary and get them on doing the same things. And you're a lone ranger as director of comp or whatever. It can be daunting. It can also be great career development, because at the end of the day, you can probably negotiate anything, or you don't last long. So it's an interesting process, but the matrix piece is still out there, and you got different challenges, matrix versus direct, and that's, I guess, a good hybrid of that, or one that really can reflect good sound information in terms of that, is the program manager. Program managers, senior program managers, program directors, all those kind of things. Oftentimes, they have matrix people all over the organization to execute a strategy or a business product. And so again, the artful dodger here is the fact that where do the skills apply in terms of executing? And so that throws another kink in the job leveling process, because you really got to, again, you've got to really be mindful of not necessarily the cookie cutter, but what's in the dough to make it work.
I always go back to what's the job.
Yeah.
What are the decisions they're making? Who do they have to, what kind of things do they have to go up to get approval on that they can't approve day to day? What are they doing? And then market pricing that.
Yeah.
I think Michelle and Jay's points about Googling,
Yeah.
is funny. But also, that's the problem, right? If you inflate titles, then you just immediately increase the value of that person in the marketplace just by giving them a word. So right, it doesn't cost you anything to give a title until it does, because you lose that person to 30-40% more pay, because everyone else thinks they're actually a director when they're really not. So it's very easy at the time to satisfy someone's demands for a title, and until you realize that you can't match that internally with your pay.
Well, this goes to one of the trends that I'm seeing, and I would expect in 2025, the need to have more nuanced education for managers and employees about how comp decisions are made, right? People can Google anything. We have so much at our fingertips now, free pay data from lots of different sources that employees can look at, and then they ask questions about it. And if we aren't teaching our managers and helping them be capable of answering with confidence, we're in a tight spot. So I think the pressure for compensation and HR folks to be more teachers on these topics is going to continue. And especially with pay equity and pay transparency, right? I think the other trend I'm seeing is more complexity within our profession and having to meet different compliance requirements across the US as well as globally. Our world has not gotten simpler over the years. It's gotten more complex.
I think that's a great segue too for the main topic we wanted to kind of discuss today is what are we looking forward to? What are we apprehensive about in 2025? I mean, I think that over the last several years, compensation has become a much different profession than it was when I started.
Yeah.
And I think that 2025 will continue to see more changes. One of the ones that I think we'll continue to see is the rise of AI software supporting AI or supporting the compensation process. Michelle, said that, the AI is making things worse. People are asking AI, how much should I make for this? So trying to understand what is that? But I'm curious, like from your perspective, from a technology perspective, I see that proliferating and continuing to grow and create challenges from privacy, but also, how companies evaluate their competitive nature, the employee sentiment, risk factor or flight risks, things of that nature. But I'm curious, like Paul, you've done some research in this area, especially on the tech side. What are you expecting to see change in 2025?
Yeah, is my microphone better? I think I heard that there was some jargling. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so far.
Did a little tinkering while y'all were talking. I try not to make predictions, mainly because I just think I'm smart enough to make predictions. I think trends that I see are more comfortable. What I see is, and this is kind of a meta finding, the focus I expect for 2025 is how you're doing work, not just what did you produce. AI is part of that, right? So, pay transparency requirements were sort of put upon people over the past couple of years, we've responded. We've got some stuff that we did. Now it's like, well, how do we do this well and how do we keep it fresh? So it's not like the product itself changes. It's more like how we go about it and what role technology plays is an important and growing one. I do see more pings now than I saw this time last year for people thinking about making changes to technology in the future because of that, right? I think we're in sort of a tech war phase. There's more data, more tools. So as a result, there's a question about what is the most efficient way to do this, because the requests of comp are not going down, but the budget typically is, right? Like we're not entering an economic cycle where I'm hearing lots of clients saying, yeah, I got a great budget increase. I've got more money to spend. It's more, I have the same that I had last year, and now I'm being asked to figure out how to do something else. So the how we do the work is sort of the meta theme that I'm seeing kind of emerging into the year.
And I can tell a story. I just talked to one of my clients this morning, a large mining company, and gone are the days where they do Zoom calls and record them and have kind of a script where they're teaching and educating their employees and managers on something. They use AI they have a script they write, but they have AI videos that are produced. And then they use those for education and training. So kind of mini training bites of topics and things like that for annual comp planning, for decision making, for defining different things. And then they have a library of these videos that they utilize with employees and leaders to explain things, to get themselves out of some of the day-to-day tactical explaining of things. And they said it's been working quite well. So I do think the how of getting work done is changing pretty rapidly. I do think there are some employers and individuals who are not embracing that change, and they are going to get left behind. I think for us to keep up in this profession, you're going to have to say yes to some of those learning curves.
I think great statistics about the likelihood of a candidate applying for a job if they don't see the pay ranges and that kind of thing, and it just drops a lot. Right, so you'll still get applications, but you're still getting the best quality applications if you're not complying with those requirements in an effective way as well, rather than just giving a range of $0 to $500,000, whatever. Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right, Denise. Like you're going to get left behind if you don't start embracing some of the stuff.
One of the things I see that I can see applicable for those in compensation that deal with the performance management piece, and I'm not talking about performance appraisals, I'm about metrics, quantitative, qualitative, all those good things that drive the organization from goal setting and KPIs. And I can see from the standpoint on the performance side where AI could be a huge resource of capturing the key ingredients of a super performer on a production line that produces way above everybody else, capturing that, putting it on AI and show that as a video of some sort that says, this is what we're training to, or breakthroughs that you find, and be able to communicate that quicker, faster, smarter by utilizing that technology to do that. And then rewarding accordingly, because at the end of the day, the smart move is capturing what the top performance initiatives are, being able to manage to that, and then pay accordingly based on threshold, target, and stretch. And if you can get there, you're going to drive the organization to a different level. Seen it happen a number of times without the technology. With this, it's just going to speed it up.
Yeah. And in addition to the technology, I think that some of the changes that we were getting prepared for earlier this year were compliance, regulatory changes. I mean, there was a big push to make a significant change to the FLSA non-exempt requirement, which was that was vacated. But I still think that we're seeing some company or some states continue to move forward as if it were not, or they have their own independent. So my anticipation is that comp teams will still need to be very familiar with changing regulations, whether they're states or local. And as the globalization of compensation continues, especially outside of the US, the rules that are required for privacy rules or pay transparency, pay equity outside of the US, especially in the EU and Canada, will continue to be something that require lots of touch points on.
Yeah, and I think that's going to drive kind of back to that comp philosophy. You're going to have to pull that document out and think about how you're going to treat in different
me.
states with different thresholds, or how you want to handle that from the FLSA standpoint. Because employees are going to expect one thing if they have, if I'm in the middle of Minnesota and I have the same job as somebody in Washington State and the pay is dramatically different, I'm going to want to know why I'm not paid that. And it's really, back addressing that and being very transparent with the employees and working with the leaders to say, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to handle it.
Justin, I think for COP, well, this whole balancing of pay equity, pay transparency is being coupled with, you've got compression issues going on because we've been hiring in at a higher rate, for the last couple of years than we have in the past, as well as you've got limited budgets. Budgets are coming back down again. So, you're trying to keep the people you've got, you're trying to bring new people in, and you're trying to correct pay inequities. And it's just a huge challenge for comp teams with such little amounts of money available to solve all three of those issues all at one time.
Mm-hmm.
Cassandra, you've got an excellent point. On the compression side of the fence, where you're bringing in people above others, there's, like I mentioned before, there's lawsuits out there where bigger companies have really gotten slam dunked after the talent wars and bringing in people way above everybody else. It's going to filter down below the bigger companies and start middle companies, and that's going to happen. It begs the question back to management. Hey, we need to set aside at least 1% of payroll to be able to address some of these issues. So you're not spending 10% of payroll getting out of jail card free kind of thing. It really comes down to back to a business decision. And I think it's, if there is a problem, it's certainly compelling to say, we either do this or you run the risk of this. And it's not that difficult to figure out what the yin and yang is on that one. And then the other, in terms of budgeting, we often utilize the information from crowdsourcing. All the survey sources say, hey, 3%, 3%, 3%. You go online and find out what your industry is and look at what the wage growth is, and it says 4.5. You're at 1.5% below the market if you're going 3%. So, those are the kind of things where you've got to be a lot more knowledgeable about the effectivity of the outside or the external environment, not just internally in terms of what's cooking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Bob, I'm
getting. Sorry, Cassandra, you go first.
I sort of say I'm starting to get more and more calls from smaller companies who are really struggling with the whole retention issue because larger companies are plucking people out of them right and left. And they can't afford the salaries at that level.
Yep.
And that's just becoming really huge for smaller companies now.
That was kind of my question, actually. Like, what does everyone feel about the hiring market right now? As we went through some aggressive times, and we went through some aggressive stagnation when, like, Microsoft announced a 0% budget and that kind of thing. What's our pulse? Like Cassandra, you said, like, you're seeing a lot of big companies coming after smaller companies. How are we feeling about 25? How do you think it's going to shape up in terms of merit budgets, in terms of the aggressiveness of that talent market?
I think it's an employer's market at this point. I don't see that changing anytime soon. So I not only work with employers doing compensation projects, but I also work with employers or employees and do pay negotiation coaching and teach them how to ask for more money and get it by asking in the right way. And, I certainly have seen a lot of a shift in the last year in the leverage that they have in those discussions. It's very much more on the employer side. I do think we have a golden opportunity, given these compliance and regulatory changes, to do more education and training. There's a lot of stuff that we talk about in a very comp HR nerdy kind of way that we need to simplify and just have quick sound bites and quick confident answers to topics. And it doesn't have to be long. It can be pretty short. I'm a firm believer in giving people tools and FAQs and resources for those types of things. But I think the hiring market is definitely an employer's space right now. And maybe it'll change in 2026 or not. We'll see what the new administration here in the US does and how things kind of shift economically. But
I don't know, because James, I'm seeing a lot of articles saying that next year employees are going to start jumping around all over the place again, and that we're going to see a lot of movement that we haven't seen, this year, maybe even didn't see in 23. So I'm going to be curious myself to see, even based on what Denise has said, but yet based on what I'm hearing, are people going to jump around or are they going to sit tight?
I think people are going to sit tight. You got to be in a niche or something that's really wanted in order to find a job. But what I'm hearing from my clients is it takes a long time to get a good offer from a good company. And a lot of them are settling for what they can get instead of what they could have gotten a few years ago, which was much higher and a lot more robust employee market. So we'll see.
There's something you've got to give, right? Because you tend to get these periods where people don't move and they end up with this pent up sort of desire to move around, and everyone's sort of waiting until things are favorable and they can do that. So, like Cassandra, I think it's kind of a question of when that happens, if it's going to be 25. But Denise, to your point, is it just going to be a little bit flatter for a while? So, I don't know. I'm just not really expecting any fireworks next year. I think things have returned to a little bit more of a stable norm, and maybe we'll start seeing a little bit more movement, but it just doesn't really feel like there's not much more on the hands of employees compared to a couple of years ago.
And it is interesting too when we look at the trends since several years. February of 2022 was that peak for hiring, the rate of hiring, and the number of people leaving, and that has been steadily. Hiring has come down, and people leaving have also come down. But it's been fairly consistent for the last almost 2 years now. And what we're also seeing too is, there are 0.9 eligible candidates per job out there. So there are still more people or more jobs than there are people now. But I do find it interesting that those numbers have come up. So I think the trend that we're seeing is that it's not as bad as it was, but it's still not necessarily, it's still fairly low in terms of the challenges people are having with finding work from a numbers perspective specifically.
Yeah.
I think if you look at job growth too, and who's going to be hiring in 2025, where are the trends in terms of the economy and what's being dialed up by the administration, manufacturing, semiconductor, that kind of stuff. I think you're going to see a lot of movement going on because people are going to be dialing for dollars. I think in other industries, retail or whatever. And then the last piece that I think you have to take into healthcare is going to be big time. So what are the trending industries that are happening? And those are where the markets are going to be, I think, driving in terms of volatility. But I think the other piece of the puzzle is how many more companies are going to keep demanding back in house. And I think part of the reason why they're doing that is to control their cost, because if you're out mobile or remote, then I can only control certain things, and I want to be more controlling because the market's changed again. And so I think from that standpoint, you're getting a lot more demands of, we want you in house. They say, sorry, we're not going to do that. They say, okay, good luck, see you later. And to your point, Denise, that's where I think people are going to say, I'm going to duck and lay low and see how this landscape changes, because right now I think that's the $100,000 question. What really is going to change in the landscape in 2026, 25, 26?
I think when uncertainty exists, there's just a lot of tightening, right? Like even in my personal life, I'm tightening my belt and looking at what I've got subscriptions in and expenses and tightening things up. And I see that across employers very consistently, whether they're small or whether they're large. We'll see what happens. But to James's point earlier, I don't think we're going to have any big anything this next year. I think it's going to be pretty stable and steady Eddie.
Now, geopolitically wise, boy, that's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
And that can change a lot of dynamics overnight, depending on how that spins too.
Yeah, true. Very true. What other trends are you guys seeing as you work with various clients across different industries? Are you seeing anything specific for, like Bob was saying, healthcare versus more manufacturing or retail, hospitality? What are you guys seeing from an industry perspective?
I have one I'd add, and it's mostly manufacturing, but not always. And it's the desire to think hyper locally. Right. So like benchmarking data has kind of a natural point where it doesn't get that local. You know, I was talking to a client with a plant on they could describe it as the western slopes of Colorado. Well, what location is that? You might have a perspective on this, you Colorado folks. But,
Yeah, I can
right.
speak to that.
Like, that's a pretty specific location, but they're
It
like,
is.
look, it is a market unto itself, right?
Yeah.
And we have to think about it very uniquely and discreetly. So it's how do we go about, like, the old GeoDiff model isn't feeling great for them, because when Amazon sticks a distribution center, or when the plant across the street makes a change in that hyper local setting, they have to respond. So it's like, I don't think it's rocket science, but it's a rethink of, like, how do we track locality and how do we manage the complexity of locations when the market has become a very surgical thing, particularly in that, call it, sub $30 an hour sort of workforce segment.
Agreed. I have had lots of conversations with those types of firms about the hyper locality of, you know, what are their competition, and when you're less than $30, right, you'll move for 20 cents, 40 cents, 50 cents an hour, and rightly so, right? You've got bills to pay, and the cost of living is high, and cost of labor hasn't necessarily kept up 100% with cost of living changes. So, agreed. Just because I have had lots of conversations with employers about their geographic differential philosophy lately. My advice is always to be simple. Don't be overly complex and overly try to manage that to the nth percentage, right? But I have some employers who are so tied to managing it in 5% increments, et cetera, that I just shake my head with the complexity they've created and the challenges they've made for themselves in terms of day-to-day decision making, and how it has to stay very centralized in order for people to cope with the complexity they've built. And I'm not sure it's a value add from a business perspective.
Yeah, the more precise in that, the worse it is.
Yeah,
geographic differentials, because
just
it's assuming that we know exactly what the pulse of that environment is, right? So if
right.
it's a 0.1%, we got to move too. That's just not sustainable.
And what I try to tell people is, you know, just because you can pull a number out of a database, whether it's cash comp or equity or, you know, something else, geographic differentials, et cetera, it doesn't mean the reality of the people who are living in that location. You still need to talk to those leaders and employees who are living in that location so that you can hear their stories. And I think sometimes if you're sitting in a centralized comp function or HR function, you aren't necessarily attached to the stories on the ground, and you need to really understand what's happening in practice by talking to the recruiters and the leaders and employees in specific locations to understand what's really going on in the marketplace. Because sometimes the data in the databases isn't telling the whole story.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Justin, I just saw a squirrel running across the fence. Oh my gosh, it's heading to the western slopes of Colorado. That may be something for squirrel to take care of. Sorry, couldn't resist.
Opportunity.
No, I mean, it's funny. We were working with a client not too long ago, and they have 500 locations, and many of them are in the same cities. And you know, they were using a survey provider that kind of goes down to the zip code level.
Yeah.
What was really interesting was when you actually start to look at it, there are differences in those zip codes that can be somewhat dramatic. And a lot of times when you think of the high-end shopping retail centers where you've got like your Nordstroms or your Saks Fifth Avenues or just your Apple stores, they are typically, you're finding that there is a very, I mean, so hyper local. It's at that shopping center where they are willing to pay more for those particular roles. And you have somebody in the same, you know, commuting area, same job, same company many times where they're paying 50 cents or $1 less. So they begin to start competing with themselves. So, I mean, I think we're going to continue to see some of those things happening. I mean, they're happening now. I don't know why they would go away, but then understanding how do you manage those still is going to go back to, you know, what does it take to be competitive? How do we not compete with ourselves, and what's the right thing for the business?
Another area, the area I'm interested in next year as well, is what's going to happen with the VC-backed market as well, because I was just reflecting that this time last year, I and a lot of people are looking at it and saying, okay, well, funding's gone. There wasn't much work from the VC-backed market from a consulting perspective, which always tells you a lot about the state of things. And everyone's predicting no IPOs, consolidation, big tech coming in, buying up all these startups and, you know, that kind of thing. it didn't really happen very much. Everything just kind of went quiet, and a lot of those companies kind of just slashed their workforce. Their valuations went really far down, but they still got funding. They still got some of that dry powder, as it's known, like in the VC funding community, and they just kind of kept going. And then it's actually kind of come back a bit this year, and the work's been there. These companies have been hiring again. They just kind of gone back to probably what they should have been doing in the first place, a bit more fiscally responsible, the more pressure from their investors on actually kind of becoming profitable and consolidating their efforts and that kind of thing. So I wonder if we're going to start to see more IPOs coming next year. Maybe not quite the big, unicorn, decacorn type IPOs that we're so used to a few years ago. But I'm sort of looking at that with interest. I'm not going to make any more predictions because I keep getting it wrong, but I'm interested to see what happens in that VC-backed market.
Is there anything that you guys are specifically preparing for your organizations? I mean, that you're thinking like these are the things that we not necessarily expect, but the things that you were maybe surprised by the volume of this year and you expect it to continue into next year. For us, it's been job architecture. It seems like everybody is doing a job architecture project. And if they're not, they're helping someone else do a job architecture project.
Yeah.
Is there anything that's really kind of jumped out in 2024 that you expect will continue through 2025 that may not be on folks' radars or that kind of caught you as a surprise this year?
Pay equity is becoming a very hot topic for our clients wanting to do pay equity analysis, which creates a whole different realm of opportunity for job architecture and aligning jobs. And everything that goes into a pay equity analysis falls back into that job architecture again. So I think that's sometimes forgotten when we get that from a client that says, well, we want to do a pay equity analysis. And you ask the question, so how does your job architecture look? And it's like, job architecture? So that's the other thing that we're seeing a lot of.
Hey, Justin, Michelle has a comment about a lot of requests for new bonus structures. I would say that's something we're seeing as well. Variable pay is not going away, but instead they are reevaluating who's eligible, what's the performance metrics, are they working, are they driving what we need, and just, how do we use the funds we do have for variable pay in the best way that we possibly can. So we're anticipating continued work on variable pay.
Yeah.
Mergers and acquisitions are going to be, I think, huge next year. Everybody's talking about it. The financial guys are licking their lips. The hedge funds and all the other kind of stuff in the world money they're licking their lips just because of the changes in the laws that are coming down the pike through the executive orders and stuff from what I've been listening to and hearing. I think what's going to be interesting about that is that it's going to open up that whole dynamic again in terms of all the things we've just been talking about for the last 45 minutes to an hour. It's just going to exacerbate that piece of the puzzle, I think, because everybody's going to want to see deals get done quicker, faster, smarter. And so there's going to be a lot of smashing going on. That's one of the things I see. The other is back to variable. Again, we're back to 3% increases or 3.5% increase thought processes. Inflation's running 2.4, 2.6. I don't know. I was going to look up the latest and greatest that came out yesterday, and I forgot to do that. But I heard it went up just a touch. But if you think about back to geopolitical and the macro piece of the puzzle that's going on, if we get into trade wars and those kind of things, we don't know how that's going to affect certain things, including inflation, cost of goods and services, all those kind of things, which is going to put a wrench into all the other things we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to be an interesting trend coming out in the first quarter, second quarter of next year. Where is the Fed and was the government? Where is that going to take us? And how quick are they going to execute what they want to execute? And everything I'm hearing is yesterday. So, it just depends on what that means. And it's going to highly affect us, I think, because people are then going to scramble. And you know how that's what happens. It's like cost of living, cost of labor. What does that mean? Well, if you've been winning for the last 10 years and all of a sudden inflation goes up 1% and you're freaking out because, oh my gosh, the world's coming to an end. People don't understand the dynamics of that. And so they jump to interesting conclusions. I think we're going to see some of that stuff. Oh, balloons are up in the air.
Yay, you, James.
What are they?
I think
Beam
the
me up,
first
beam me
quarter
up,
will be
Scotty. But
I think the
anyway.
first quarter is going to be interesting.
Yeah, I agree. We'll see what people come out of the gate with. Yeah, I don't know. We haven't talked about the aliens in the ocean. What's that going to do?
They're coming out because all those drones that are hitting the East Coast. Who knows what that's all about?
Do you guys think that 2025 could finally be the year that skills-based pay actually starts to become a thing? Because I feel like
that's a slippery slope to hell in my mind. I don't like skills-based
I feel like it's been on the verge of happening every year for the last 5 years or so.
It's always been. It only works for some roles. Like it's skills-based pay. It works totally fine if you're an accountant and you need certain qualifications to be able to do certain things, and then you pay by the skill. But like if you're a problem-solving, collaborative, abstract thinking role, then it just doesn't work that well. It's always been a challenge. Like, it's lovely to think that you could just completely commoditize skills and assign value to it. And it would be great if we could do that, make life so much easier. But humans just don't really work that way for most roles. They do for some roles, and it's been skills-based pay for years. But most roles just don't see it.
Yeah, I made a statement at the conference at World of Work last year, which is if you ask, and we could test it probably, but we don't have time. Like if you ask 7 comp thinkers what skills-based pay is, you probably get 10, right? Like I don't even think we all define it the same way.
No, we don't.
Because I agree, James. People have done it for years. I built a skill-based manufacturing comp progression in 2003, right? Like this is not recent history at this point, where it was like objective, observable, like you know how to push the button on that machine. That's a skill, right?
Yeah.
Right? That's not new news. Whereas I think what people are trying to do is like, can my resume be scraped? Can my LinkedIn profile be understood? Can something that I've written infer that I'm really good at this thing, and as a result, I should get paid more? I think that's a leap and a half.
I always tell people just because somebody went and got a certification or a certain degree or certain something doesn't necessarily translate it into actual performance. So you can check the box on a lot of skills. Competencies is another word that gives me the heebie-jeebies, but you can define those things. That's great, but I want to see it applied consistently and the performance and the outcomes be better because you got it. Then I'll pay for it, because I think the other where you just check the box and pay, it's a slippery slope to adding to your cost of labor that is not good.
Yeah.
I think it depends too on the industry, and it depends on the jobs.
Yeah.
As an example, in manufacturing back in the day, and this is back in the 80s, early 90s, skill-based pay was a big deal to quicker, faster, smarter in manufacturing. Well, so they put in certification programs to get the skills. Then once you got the certification, you got bumped up, you got bumped up, you got bumped up. Well, guess what? Everybody decided they want to get bumped up. They got the certifications. Everybody is now a senior assembler. And guess what? You don't need 16 senior assemblers to get the job done. So from an economic value, people like us got called up and go, help me blow this up. And what do I need to do to make that work quicker, faster, smarter the other way? Because I'm losing money because we're paying all these people this money that they're doing entry-level work.
Well, now Bob, now they have director assemblers, because then that differentiates the senior assembler from the director, right?
This sounds like a state agency thing where you have 17,452 administrative assistants levels.
I did a tree trimmer 1, 2, 3 job leveling exercise once for a city. I was like, you need different levels of tree trimmers? What? Okay, we'll define it.
Choice of tools, Denise. Choice of tools.
Oh my goodness.
Height
Well, and
is more risky.
Hi.
Does anybody think the data is really out there to do skill-based pay? I mean, really?
I think there are software companies in comp tech that tries to put it out there, but I don't. I also think, to Paul's earlier point, we all have different definitions of it, right? And it's so nuanced, and you have to be really careful about setting a precedent and doing something. And a lot of companies don't model that, the impact of that, beyond the first year or two, and think about how it's going to set things up for the long term, Bob, to your point, where they realize later they've got more expense than their business can handle. So I don't know. Be careful. Proceed with caution.
Yeah, we have like 3 minutes left, but I think about AI and machine learning too. And then the jobs that actually need it versus the people who come in and have it but aren't using it. So
We're not using it well.
Or not using it at all. Maybe they have some experience in AI and machine learning. Should we be paying them for that? That's not a requirement of their job.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've faced. Not me personally, but
I just think there's so many jobs, the skill is so irrelevant next to the value that someone brings to the organization. Like if you did a skills-based pay assessment of Sam Altman of OpenAI, does it matter? Like the point is the value you're bringing to the company. It's similar with software roles, and it's not your skills, it's your innovative capacity, which in turn translates to value. So it's just there's so many roles, and the higher you go up, the less relevant skills-based pay gets. Like it just. It's just this discussion been doing the round for so long. I feel like this has always been there in the background, and various times survey companies have tried to collect and report, and most of the time it doesn't work very well. And they sort of just disappears and then comes back again.
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons it's coming back is we're enabling maybe leaders not being able to make those choices and have those hard discussions with employees on the job that they're doing and how well they're doing it. So let's start to quantify it differently, because I don't want to have that conversation, right?
That's an excellent point. I do think the lack of courage and backbone to have difficult conversations continuously gets in the way of true performance enhancement and improvement. And there's, I can only put so much cash in somebody's pocket or equity or recognition, etc. But at the end of the day, if somebody isn't getting honest feedback and feedback in a way that is actionable, and if you don't know as an individual how to listen and how to take that feedback in and assess and then utilize it to drive your own performance, I think that's a huge opportunity. We're just hitting as an HR organization and as business leaders, right? Like it's not just an HR driven thing, it's a business leader capability and function that needs to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's money. So it's like why can't 3 performance factors matter or make a difference? We have to have 8.
Yeah. The comp plan shouldn't do your performance management for you. You still kind of have to
exactly. That's right. So
good point.
All right.
Good spot to end our conversation, Justin. We're close to wrapping up here. We've had some good comments in the as well.
Oh, absolutely. And again, it's been really fun talking with everyone for the last several months. So Sherry, Cassandra, James, Denise, Bob, and Paul, thank you guys so much for joining the Pay Practitioners panel. We've got a lot of great feedback from, I don't know if you guys get the same feedback, but I always have folks reach out to us or to myself directly to kind of say they really enjoy the content. They really enjoy the discussion and just the format and the knowledge and the experience that everybody brings. So thanks for sharing your experience and thoughts with everybody. And I'll look forward to seeing you guys next year sometime.
Sounds good.
Happy holidays, everybody. I'll take care.